right. All right. Welcome, everyone. This is Up Close and Personal with Unexpected Productions. Today, we're interviewing Margot Leitman. Before we get started, I want to thank Randy Dixon for allowing me to steal this spot and take over for the day. I want to thank our staff, our board, and our performers, and all of our students at Unexpected Productions. And here we have Margot Leitman.
Hi.
Hi, let me brag on you, Margot. You have a wonderful history in storytelling and improv and acting and all sorts of things, don't you?
Yes, and writing.
So Margot has written, long story short, the only storytelling guide you'll ever need, as well as What's Your Story, a workbook that goes with that wonderful book, and a wonderful book called Gawky. Am I saying that right? Gawky, which is that a biography or?
Yeah, it's a memoir. I'm leaning at my computer's on it right now, but here, we'll go real low.
Oh, cool. There we go.
Here we go.
You've also written for NBC, DreamWorks, the Hallmark Channel, as well as being the West Coast Story Scout for This American Life. I want to hear more about that in a bit. That must have been fascinating. And winner of many Moth Grand Slams, and I think you were the first to get a total 10 at a Moth Grand Slam in New York.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. You've been featured on Risk podcast and the Moth podcast and several other podcasts, and the founder of the storytelling program at UCB.
Yeah. As
well as being many other things, a writer, a mother, all around incredibly wonderful, funny person.
Thank you. Wow, that was a great intro.
I cheated. I had my notes so I could remember.
That was very well done and very flattering and sort of weird to listen to.
Yeah, it's always weird to hear people. So the last time I saw you was around this time last year.
I know, it was so weird. I was in Seattle doing some workshops. I saw you. We sat across from each other on a couch with no masks. I stayed in a hotel. I flew without fear. And then
the pandemic it was hitting here in Seattle at the time.
Yeah, but it wasn't even really on my radar too much at that time because I live in LA. And then I flew back, and I would say maybe like 2 days later, things really started shifting.
Really kind of crazy. Was that the last time you taught live?
No, I taught live. So I don't know about Seattle. March 13th, everything shut down here. Mm-hmm. And so March 12th, I taught a class at UCB. I went in at 11 and I ended at 2. And in the time that I was in there teaching, by the time I got out, I had an email saying we're shutting everything down. Like, that's it. We have, everybody need for safety. So during that class, they made a decision to shut everything down. So I think I taught me and this other guy, Alan, and this other guy, Todd, I think we were all teaching at the time. I think we're the last classes taught in person. Yeah. So the day before everything shut down.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Our last show was March 15th, and it was my show, Inside Storytelling.
March
15th.
So that was live?
Yep, it was our last live show up until last Wednesday. We opened at 25% capacity for our duo showcase. Wow. Everyone in masks. We have arrows to follow, safety protocols in place. And so we're hoping to stay open unless there's a stupidity spike.
Right. Yeah, it's been weird.
So I'm curious, how did you get into storytelling?
Not linearly, not in a direct route. I think I was doing stand-up. I went to school for theater. Mm-hmm. I did a lot of comedy when I graduated and some commercial stuff and acting and such. Nothing very successful in the acting world, but moderate success, a couple commercials, enough to get a SAG card. And I was doing a lot of stand-up comedy and I didn't love it. And I started reading a lot. At my parents' house, actually, in New Jersey. I was living in New York, and went to my parents' house, and they had this small, this book by Spalding Gray, a manuscript of his, which was Monster in a Box, on their bookshelf. And I'm a huge reader, and I just like grabbed this book off the bookshelf, and I read the whole thing in a day. It's very short. Don't be too impressed, but and I really was inspired by it. And then I started reading the other author I started reading at the time was Jonathan Ames's personal essays. And I was really inspired by that. And then I started taking some personal essay writing classes and memoir writing and such. And then I started kind of venturing into life storytelling. So this was like all, I think the moment I got into it was when I read that Spalding Gray manuscript. And I just thought, well, maybe this is a way I could perform that is different from stand-up, but still live performing. But this seems more like what I'd want to be doing. Yeah.
And it seems to have blossomed around the world, storytelling.
Yeah, it wasn't as blossomed at the time. So I think this was probably around 2006. And at the time, it was not as huge, no. At least in New York. There was The Moth, and there was like one other storytelling show. And then I started a storytelling show with a partner in 2007. And on January 2nd, 2007, we started day after New Year's. And there was a line around the block to get in.
Really?
And a bunch of people were turned away on the first show because they couldn't fit everybody in. And that moment was very eye-opening for me, because I was like, because I was doing stand-up all the time for, no offense to stand-up, but I was doing for a lot of empty audiences because there was an oversaturation at the time of comedy shows. But there wasn't enough storytelling, so people really wanted to see it. And all of those people that were turned away came the next month, and it really built from there. So I think that was a really eye-opening thing for me, that it was like, people want this. There's a desire for this. And when I started teaching it a few years later, classes really didn't have trouble selling, So I knew it was a skill that people wanted to learn, but I had to learn it first, obviously, before I could teach it, which is a mistake a lot of teachers make.
Oh, right. Yeah, you got to do it. You got to fail a lot to be a good teacher, I think.
Oh, I love failing. It's one of my greatest hobbies. Yes.
Because I've become very good at it, as a matter of fact.
I'm great at it.
Okay, I'm curious. Okay, just since we're in that line, did you ever have a story that you thought everyone was going to just love? And went out and told it, and it just fell
Well,
flat.
I've had stories that have killed in one environment, and then you go in another one, and everyone hates me. I did some story in New York on my show. Well, so I had this show called Strip Stories for a while with my friend Julia Rossi, who's a great comedian. And we did this show, and it was like sex, love, dating themed stories. And we definitely had a big audience that would repeat and come and kind of knew us, and they knew what they were getting, and they felt like they knew us. And so I think I told this story about this weird hookup I had with this massage therapist that I really was not pleased with the situation. And I told the story in Philly about a couple months later in a show that was just like, I was like a guest on. I was not in my own turf, not in my own city. And everyone, I think, thought I was an asshole for the way I was speaking of this experience. They were like, he seems wonderful. And it was very much eye-opening, because I was like, oh, they don't know me. They don't know what I like, what I don't like. They don't know. This isn't, I wasn't playing at a home game. So no one, it was really interesting to show that, like, you really do have to frame why you are likable if it's not built in. And that was really eye-opening. But yeah, they definitely hated me, for sure.
Yeah, that's it's where we learn, you learn a little bit from success. You learn a great deal from when it doesn't go well. Because you learned that you probably have to share more about your home turf, about who you are, right?
But the other thing was that I probably wasn't following my own rule in that moment, which was that storytelling should always be about you and your experience and what a fool you are. And I think that in hindsight, that story was pretty negative on him, more so than on me and what I needed to work on, you know, which was really a learning experience from that, because it was like, well, why did this suck up with this? I mean, I'm not going to go into this because
but it leads to, you know, what do you think that some are some of the bigger mistakes storytellers make, especially when they're first starting out?
I mean, I think, and again, that was within my first few years of doing it. So yeah, I do think that is a mistake. People like to tell stories about what a jerk my boss is, and that's the whole story. And it's never, you know, any introspection or self-awareness or anything like that. And it's just this, that just seems sort of mean. And I think that's kind of how I came off when I told that story in Philly, for sure. So I think that, you know, to making it about the other person rather than you, not remembering that you're at the star of the story and you're the person experiencing change and you're the person that was really affected by this rather than talking about the other person. I think that mistake is done a lot. And I think I totally learned from that. And I don't think I necessarily threw the story away. I think I reshaped the story, talking about where I was at in my life and how much I was really seeking affection and attention at that time in my life, that I was willing to get it from someone that was in every way not what I was looking for, you know? And so I was able to reshape it, being like, this guy's wild, to being like, you know, you were in a dark place, which we've all been in, you know?
Yeah. So you did stories, and then what inspired, which came first, going to UCB or becoming the story teacher at UCB, or your book?
The teaching for a while. Actually, a lot came. So I would say 2006, 2007, I started taking writing classes and then teaching and then telling stories. 2007, I started my own storytelling show with Julia, and then started doing a lot of other people's storytelling shows. And for a little while, that was probably when it started popping off in New York, at least. And then we toured a lot. We went everywhere. We went to Seattle. No one came.
Oh no.
This was such a defining moment, because it was such a defining moment of she and I's personalities. I hid in the green room and panicked. She went out into the street and begged people to come in. And that's what happened. And it was so evident of our personalities in that moment. And she got a few. The only I got to come was the concierge from our hotel. And that was it. But no one came, and but we went everywhere, and I mean, all over the country. We had a lot of fun, and that I worked as a touring storyteller comedian for a while with that show, and then and I guess then I started teaching. I created a curriculum. I taught it somewhere else privately, like twice, then pitched it to UCB, and they took it. And then that really grew to a 101, a 201, and a boot camp, and a writing groups, and all this stuff. And then around 2009, 2010, I started getting hired by corporations. And then that was wild. I would live in New York, and in 1 week, I was working for this company. I would fly from New York to LA to San Francisco, back to New York, all in a week, every week for 6 weeks at a time, to do storytelling. And it was really exciting. And then I went to work in Australia for a bit, which was amazing. And then, and maybe about a year after that, I sold Gawky, my memoir, published a bunch of essays. And then after that, so this is a long time later, I published Long Story Short. So it was a long journey. Yeah.
Wow. And how long did you have to work on Long Story Short to get it in shape?
That was easy, because at that point I had been teaching for a long time. I mean, longish. And I knew it worked. and it was an instructional guide to storytelling presented in a really fun way.
Yeah, it's a great book.
For me,
great book.
What?
Great book.
Thank you. But so for me, it was pretty easy. It flew out of me because it was like, I've got experience here. I know what's working, what's not working, what people like, what people don't like, what people get results from. And I just basically found a fun way to put what taking a class with me was like into a book. So that flew out of me really quickly. And then it sold so fast because I know that because when I tried to sell my memoir as a first-time author, it was a really big challenge. And then this went out, and within the first week, there were multiple bids on it, and I knew I was onto something.
And another Seattle connection, your publisher.
By Sasquatch Books, who was the only one in the bidding war that was willing to let me do it in the way I envisioned it, which was not as some sort of technical textbook, which was not as a storytelling for business guide, which was in this fun way. They were the ones that artistically supported me in the way that I wanted to do it. And that's why I went with them, and I've done 2 books with them, and hopefully we'll do more. And I just love them.
And now I have to pitch that you are going to be teaching for us on February 20th and 21st.
Yeah.
And tell us what you're teaching and tell us about these classes.
So I'm going to be doing a 3-hour, don't worry, we'll take a pee break, don't worry, a comedic storytelling class. So we focus on comedy because that's where my background is. If you are a person that does not want to tell a comedic story, that's completely fine. I've worked with many students and companies that that isn't their goal. But we'll learn basically story construction, the do's and don'ts. Everyone's going to have some participation in here. We'll learn story construction. We'll learn presentation as well. And we'll learn how to get past a lot of the fear that we're not interesting, the fear that we don't have enough stories to tell, a fear of being honest in your storytelling, and do a lot of exercises in there. So you'll leave going, okay, this is what's interesting about me. This is what in a room, because it's somewhat like a writer's room in that you get to learn what is interesting, what are people gravitating towards, what's hitting. These are the story, and you'll probably leave with I wouldn't give you an exact number, but a few different beginning nuggets of stories that you will have instructions of how to construct afterwards and how to perform, etc.
Thanks. Well, just the Saturday class is sold out with a wait list. The Sunday class, we have plenty of spots in right now, but the neat thing is you're keeping it small. We're keeping the classes small so everyone will get a lot out of it.
I love participation. No one wants to listen to me talk for 3 hours. We need to have the group chime in. And what I have learned from teaching in Seattle many times is that there are no shortage of people who are willing to participate and volunteer. So it's a really...
I think the third time you're teaching with us, thank you. Those classes are February 20th and 21st from 10 to 1 with a pee break.
Yes.
And it can be found on our website at www.upimprov.org. And you can find in the class section. What is your favorite thing about teaching?
I have to say, I hear great stories all the time. Is one of the things. Like, I hear crazy stories every day, especially these last few weeks I've been teaching a lot. And I realized something yesterday, something happened yesterday that's one of my favorite things, which is that a student completely shocked me and said something that I have never in all my years of teaching heard in the world, and it was from the least expected person. And it's those moments that I'm just like, my God, there is more than meets the eye to everyone. And I really had a moment yesterday. I was like, I think it's hard to shock me, but I was like floored by what this student said. And so I think it's that feeling of like, I get paid to hear people's crazy stories. And, I don't know, maybe therapists might feel the same way if you're a therapist watching it, you do. But I think that's really, I don't know anyone that really does. And I think that's really fun. And then my other favorite thing about teaching storytelling, which is something that isn't happening right now, is the travel aspect of it. I really, really miss that so much.
Traveling.
Well, I get to pay to see places and connect with storytelling communities all over. You know, I mean, when I was quite new at this, I got to go live in Australia for 6 weeks and work with a theater company. And 2 years ago, I got to go to India, and I was supposed to over the summer be in the English countryside, like these places that I get paid to go to and connect with their communities. And I find, oh my goodness, there's a huge storytelling scene in this tiny town in the countryside of England that I had no idea existed. And look at these amazing stories I get to hear. So
that's great. So I'm curious, I was really intrigued as I was going through your biography again about being a story scout.
Oh yeah.
For This American Life, right?
Yeah.
What was that like and what did that entail? Because I'm really curious about that.
You know what? There was a really great lesson I learned from that, which is that, and this is something that I have stood by forever now since then, which is that it's very, you know, a lot of us, we wait for the perfect job. But in that moment, I actually went to them and said, there was no job opening there. You know, there wasn't a job listing. Really? I went to them and I said, I think you should hire me. There's amazing storytelling in Los Angeles. There's no one pulling from the stories here. There's a huge scene. I teach classes all the time. I hear amazing stories. And I think some of these stories would be great on your show. And I can bring you some really great curated pieces, but I think you should hire me.
That's great.
Yeah. And it was a really great learning experience of like, oh, I could wait until I finally see a listing for something, or I can say, so yeah, they did. And I did it for a year and it was really great. I pulled most, you know, I would pull from the stories I was hearing all the time. And at the time, tons of live performing, tons of teaching workshops. And it's, you know, it's very competitive to get your pieces on the air, but I think I got at least 3 that aired from people that were really long pieces, sometimes a full episode from that. And then, you know, a bunch that they still, the way the show worked, that are still either were recorded and never aired or are, you know, still in looking for the right episode to air. And then I left right before I had my second son. And then after I was supposed to go on maternity leave and I ended up not coming back because my independent work, like my self-employment, was pretty much picking up and I had to, you know, choose between the two.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So a lot of folks say, oh, I don't know, I'm not interesting enough to have a story. I don't have any stories. Are there games that you like that you don't mind sharing, maybe 1 or 2 games that people can use to help figure out a story?
Yeah, my favorites, I was, blank is the story of my life. That's what I do in the first class when I do full-length classes. So I have everyone line up and I say the phrase I am, and everyone just steps forward with something true. It just needs to be true about themselves. So, you know, I am a lawyer, I am left-handed, whatever that may be. But then once they run out of the first thing that they identify as, where that, you know, I am a lawyer, let's say that may be someone's main part of their identity, then they may say something like, I am confused, I am a former bartender, I am, you know, they start going through it. And then and then all my ears will perk up. I'll go, well, how does a bartender end up a lawyer? And then there's probably an interesting story there. And then you can talk to them after and cultivate that. So I take notes when people do that. And then when people fill in the blank of that, is so funny because often people will say like jobs that they used to have or just who a person used to be is usually hilarious. And that's usually where I get a lot of stuff. And then blank is the story of my life, is a time where we can have recurring themes that come up in a person's life that has upset them, you know, or has affected them. So always second best is a story of my life. And then, for example, and then that person may have a really great story that goes with that. So then it's interesting because a person may say, oh, I had no idea the fact that I worked on a strawberry farm in my early 20s for 4 summers in a row was interesting. You know, and I'm like, it is. Tell me about it. And well, I had this affair with this farmer. Okay, tell me. And it goes from there. And, so that's pretty much my foolproof one that I can pull things from.
That's cool.
Speaking of, I can't believe how on the camera, I had put on my grandmother's ring the other day and I got it stuck on my finger.
Oh no.
It is so red on this screen. Like every time I'm like, God, it really, like I can't wear a ring for a while. But it's really crazy to me how 3 days later, this is, it looks like I have burned myself.
Well, for everyone watching, please know Margot did not burn herself.
Not burn myself. I am still married. I cannot put a ring over my finger right now because of it, but I'm actually shocked, like by on camera, how horrible that looks. Sorry.
The ghost of Margot's grandmother came and stained her hand.
I think I might sell the ring now because I don't think I will ever put it on again after that.
Seriously?
Well, I mean, I'm like traumatized by it. Yeah.
So another thing that I wonder about is what are like one or two of your favorite stories or story experiences you've had in class?
Oh, in class?
Mm-hmm. Or at a show?
At a show, I have a lot of one. I think at a show is even funnier. Okay, so I was doing a show in New York City. It was really late and everyone was drunk and no one wanted to hear my story.
Yeah. And
I wrote about this a lot, and I've talked about this a lot in my stories, but I had this like tooth problem when I was younger that a lot of my adult teeth never came in right in the front. Like I just had baby teeth for a really long time. And eventually they realized that my teeth were never coming in and I had to get some dental implants put in right in the front. Yeah, it's why I'm funny. I'm telling you, this was like not good for popularity. So so when I was like in my 20s in New York, one of my dental implants, my body like rejected it and I had to get it removed and then a temporary tooth put in that was like a denture, like one denture for a few months before they put the new one in. So this was during the denture period. So already I'm on a high. I'm performing at night. No, everyone's drunk. No one's hearing my story. And I have the denture in. And I was telling the story and it just like flew out of my mouth onto the thing that it was like so cinematic. It was like,
oh no.
And this drunk woman goes, "Is that her tooth?" Like she calls it back. I just remember me like feeling so low in that moment that I was like, I'm not even going to explain this because you see how long that took me to explain that to you.
Yeah.
So I just like, and I just picked it up. I went like that, and I just went on with it. Oh my god. And anyway, so I was on the show, and these other two comedian storytellers who you may know, Dave Hill and Jordan Carlos, were on the show. And they were so nice to me afterwards. They took me out for a drink and they paid for the drink. And they were just so sweet about it. And they were like, we all have these rough nights. Like like they made sure that I didn't like run out the door screaming and crying and never got on stage again.
Right.
And that's kind of what's great. What I miss right now is the camaraderie of live performing and the connections you make and the weird things that happen live and how you can't curate a perfect appearance or your perfect background or whatever that is. And the rawness of it, and things go wrong, and it's hilarious. Now it's funny, but yeah, I mean, I would say that performing is one of my worst moments. Yeah.
Just curiosity, do you know David Crabb?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just met David Crabb this year, and what a fun guy. Anyway, I digress. I remember one of my favorite stories I've ever heard, and I can't remember where I heard it, was because, in Storytime, we always talk about stakes, and you got to have stakes but was about a gal getting an easy bake oven. And the struggle and the quest for an easy bake oven. And she created this epic story.
Yeah.
That all had to do with an easy bake oven. And so often folks think when you have a story, it's got to be this crazy thing. I was kidnapped in Uganda or something. And so what advice do you have for folks about things like that? You know, how can...
Well, time and time again, those are the best stories. And they tend to be very hard to do. It is easier to tell a story about getting kidnapped in Uganda because you don't have to really worry about story construction or any of those things, because the story is interesting on its own. It's just a story that kind of, it's great. Story that needs to be curated to become interesting for us to feel the same way you do, a small story, that's really challenging. So that woman's Easy Bake story is very, very hard. I coached a guy multiple times about his wanting an ice cream cake for his birthday, and he won at the Moth with it. You know, I mean, if I were to tell you this guy's going to tell you a story about wanting an ice cream cake for his birthday, you'd be like, okay. But it was brilliant, and it was all about being a child of immigrants, and it was all about like these huge things for him, and it was brilliant. And but now his problem is that people keep giving him ice cream. You know, when you say you like something and then if you put too many out, so now everyone's giving him ice cream cakes, and he's had too many. It's a good problem to have. But
the ice cream cake.
Yeah, he won the Moth, and I believe it was his very first time ever getting on stage to tell a story.
Wow.
But that is harder than anything, is to tell the small story. So now I'm losing track of what your question was, but how do you make, what was the question about?
Find where we're going. You know, just the simple stories and how they can really create big stories. Yeah, so you have to show us how much you care. If you care, I care. So you have to show me the level in which you care. If it's like, you can't tell me I want it so badly, or I was so sad. You have to say like, I didn't get out of bed for 2 days. That'll show me you're sad, over, you know, burning some cookies or whatever that is. But you have to make me care. And if you care, I care. And from great passion brings great stories. So I love assigning people to write the small things, because it's a very challenging writing exercise. And I just read this, the introduction, well, I've read the book, but the introduction to David Sedaris' new book, The Best of Me, is so good, the intro about his writing process. And what he says is like, when he was younger, he wrote a lot of big stories, and now he tends to write more about the small things as a challenge to himself. And that's how he's keeping it interesting for himself, and he prefers it now. And I don't know, maybe it's because of the world right now that we're living in, that it is all the small stuff, you know, that we can really use this time to write about these little things, you know, getting obsessed with a garden, or, you know, my friend spent days of his life curating this perfect carrot garden, and what he had was like little acorns that came out. I mean, he could write a whole story about that, and that's because of right now, we all understand what that's like. So yeah, this is a good time for small stories, because I think it's all small stories right now. Well, because we're living some big stories that I think the small stories keep us sane.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I just wrote a story about this. So I am 50% Jewish, and it's on my father's side, right? So it's not through the mother. And a few days before Hanukkah this year, got this menorah on my doorstep addressed to me with my name and address, but it wasn't through the mail. It was like just like a sticker put on it it definitely wasn't mailed to me. It was hand dropped. And it was this menorah in a box with candles and a dreidel and the story of Hanukkah. And I didn't know where it came from. And I wrote this like essay about it, because I was so like fascinated by like, I had to find out why I got this, and I had to find out who sent it. And it was only because of the times where, I mean, I was literally looking at the ring cam footage. I was calling every Jew I know, going like, did you get this? And like, none of my Jewish friends got it, but me. My father thought I was put on some sort of like neo-Nazi list and was concerned for my safety.
Oh, dear.
It was like this whole thing, and nobody would have given a crap had it not been during this time, you know? And then I ended up using it and celebrating Hanukkah for the first time in my life, and like really observing it this year, because I had it and because it was a pandemic. And at the end, I was like, I don't know who gave this to me, but I think they got what they wanted, which is that I actually honored my heritage and I actually used it. And it was this weird thing of, this is a really small thing that really affected me. And I will never know where this came from. But I went hard and I wrote a great piece about it. And it was a fun challenge to myself to write about this very small thing. Yeah.
Well, do you write daily? Are you a daily writer, or do you write when you have a story, or how does your routine go?
I did write daily when I had, when my children left the house for school. So things are a little different right now, but I write a lot. Yeah.
How old are the kids?
Well, I have a little preschooler who does go to school, but then I have an 8-year-old who needs pretty much full-time monitoring on the Zoom school. So yeah, it's rough.
That doesn't lead for a lot of time for writing.
And then I'm teaching a lot and running workshops and stuff. So yeah, but I wrote a thriller novel that I just turned into my agent. So
congratulations.
Yeah. I'm in a sweet spot where I've turned it in, but I haven't gotten my feedback yet. So right now I'm like, it's great.
I finished a book.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's gonna be, she doesn't mince words and she shouldn't. And so we'll see.
So just curious, because your book has inspired a lot of storytellers, and you hear that, I'm sure, often. What were some of the books that have inspired you?
Well, first of all, when you ask, do I write daily? And I say I used to, and times are a little bit different right now. I will say this, I read every day, no matter what. And especially I will try and read something, or whether it's I watch a masterclass on storytelling, or I read someone else's, book of stories or memoir. I will in some way work on my craft every single day of my life. And I want to make that clear, that sometimes that is giving a lot of thought to a project and figuring, or going on a long walk and figuring out the crux of something and coming back and being able to do that the next day. So I do think that's part of the process. But some of my favorite books, I mentioned before, the Spalding Gray books, manuscript really drastically changed my life. I mean, when I read those and understood that a person could sit on a stage with barely any props and just talk for an hour telling a true story, and people would pay to see that and sell out crowds, that was life-changing for me to know that. So I've read everything, all of his manuscripts and many biographies and things about him. And yeah, in my early days, I loved, he's moved more into television work, but I loved all of Jonathan Ames's personal essays and memoir and such. And then in terms of, and I'm obsessed with David Sedaris, as everyone is, and rightfully so. But then also weird books that I like to read. Like, I like the way Malcolm Gladwell tells his story. Who's not traditionally a storyteller like a Sedaris, but I think that he can integrate a story into anything he's talking about in a way that I think is so fascinating. I love whenever Tig Notaro tells a story instead of straight stand-up. I just love her.
Yeah.
She makes me laugh so hard. And then in terms of comedians, I just watched Jessica Kearson's special, Talking to Myself, and the stories that she tells in there. I mean, it's a stand-up special, but the stories that she tells in there, I was like crying, laughing at how great they were. So there's some traditional storytellers like a Sedaris, and then there's some people that, are more comedian-based that I think are really brilliant. And then I read constantly. I like Sarah Vowell's stories a lot. I think her take on things, the way she incorporates history with her storytelling, is really unique. So yeah, there's tons of people.
Did you see Nanette and Douglas Hannick?
I have not seen Nanette. Every student tells me to watch it. And at the time that it came out, it was something that felt so emotionally overwhelming to watch at that moment for me. And I'm forgetting whatever was going on in my life. And then I have meant to, and I have not. But, it's heavy. And sometimes you have to understand is that when I joke that I hear crazy stories, I also hear very intense stories in my work. And I hear sometimes very traumatic stories in my work. So sometimes when I leave, I just want to watch Riverdale. You know?
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
sometimes I'm just like, I can't, but I should.
Interestingly enough, I take a storytelling class with a gal named Gail, and in our class the other day, someone told a story, and these are well-established storytellers, and someone became emotional from the story because it triggered something. And that's the amazing thing that happens sometimes in a storytelling class, or when you're doing free writing, that it can trigger something to come up, and it can affect and impact all of us in the class as well as the teacher.
Yeah.
And in glorious, beautiful ways, because even if it's difficult, it's a wonderful celebration of life and in life's experiences, right?
Yeah, and I think that I've learned and grown a lot and had my eyes opened a lot, because I've heard a lot of very personal stories from all walks of life. And it's so interesting now that I just have a much greater understanding of where people are coming from, where I didn't before. So I think I've been very fortunate in that way, that I understand the struggles of all different types of people now in a way, because I'm hearing unedited, raw stories that maybe by the time they're published or on the stage, they may change and be a little less gritty. But I get the grittiest version of that, the truest version of that,
So what would you, kind of some do's and don'ts? What are some do's that a new storyteller should be doing, and what are some don'ts that they should never do?
I mean, a do is start small. Tell a short story. Please don't try to tell your life story in 5 minutes. Tell a story with the beginning, middle, and end that you can get through in like 5 to 7-ish minutes. So keep it short and attainable. I would keep it relatable. You want to make sure that it's a story that we can somehow tap into. There was just this, I was just reading, there was this uproar online the other day because Chrissy Teigen talked about ordering a $13,000 bottle of wine, and people were like, that's very insensitive to talk about during the pandemic when people are struggling. And I think, we're all learning, and she's learning as well, but the relatability factor needs to go in there. So if you were to start a story by saying, so we ordered this $13,000 bottle of wine, your audience is going to be like, what? But if you start your story by being like, we were looking for, I mean, if this is true, we were looking for the cheapest way to get drunk that night, something like that. I think most people in the audience would go in as if that is true to you. So keeping it relatable is a big thing. And then what I talked about before is telling stories about things that you're passionate about. If you're passionate about easy bake ovens, tell a story about that. If you're passionate, I mean, I'm passionate about a lot of things. I have a student that's really passionate about getting the best deal on airline tickets, and I could listen to her tell 20 stories about it. I'm really interested in how she does it, because she's so obsessed with it. And so I think that keeping it short, keeping it relatable, and keep telling stories you're passionate about would probably be the quick ones. And then avoiding too long. This is not a scientifically proven thing, but I do think most people zone out after about 12 minutes. Unless they know that they're coming to see John Leguizamo or whomever, doing
Mike Birbiglia or something.
Yeah, a big piece. God, I just blanked on her name, and she's so wonderful, from SNL, that does the amazing one-woman shows. She played It's Pat. She's so funny.
Now I'm spacing her name, and had I not, well, we know who we're. If you know who it is, please type it in the room, because we're spacing.
Why are we spacing out on her? But she's so great. But she's done a million one-woman shows that are very well received.
She's actually from here, and she's actually taught for us before.
Oh my God, why are we doing this? She's so great.
Shannon, no. Anyway, well, we'll get to it.
Okay, if you're going to see her, you know that you're going for a long piece and your brain is there. But if you're going to see a collection of stories on a storytelling show, and this person's talking for like 16 minutes, at a certain point, you're like, okay. So I think that's a big problem.
Julia Sweeney. Thank you, Denny.
Oh God, I love her. Thank
Julia Sweeney. Thanks, Denny Atkins.
Oh. Thank you, Denny. Julia Sweeney, and she's one of my heroes. And
yes, she's marvelous.
She really is, and I can't believe I just blanked on that. Okay, but anyway, so too long, problem. Details, I think people waste a lot of time going into great detail on things that don't pay off. You know, they're talking a lot about like, for example, this is a big one people do. They have a story about a fight they got in with one roommate. They say, I lived in a house with a bunch of roommates. And then they'll go through with great detail the 6 other roommates in the house, and then get to, and then there was Charlie. And I'm like, you have 5 minutes here, and you just took 2 minutes to introduce 5 people that we will not hear about for the rest of the story. You know? So I think that's a problem, is these really long details. And then another thing I see a lot in newcomers to storytelling is telling stories that we're not over. Stories that we are emotionally not over, that are, you know, when you think, is this a scar or a wound? It's 100% a wound. You're going to rip off that Band-Aid and blood is going to gush out. So I think that emotion is okay. But I think like breaking down, sobbing, and not being able to talk is problematic.
Yeah.
In terms of storytelling for entertainment.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And, you know, I've sometimes have been at a moth show where you see someone up there sharing something that, you know, they've never told stories before, but they're sharing a story about the death of their father a week ago. And you're like, oh.
I don't think that's a good idea. I think that you have to remember that at the end of the day, people are going there still to be entertained. You know, I mean, even a serious movie is entertainment. That is the section of the shelf it's going to be on if you were to buy the movie, you know, entertainment. So you have to remember that. And it doesn't mean it has to be funny, but you do have to remember that if you are shaking, I mean, think about like a wedding speech where a person's just like a mess or blubbering mess, then everyone gets uncomfortable, and then it's a mess. So that person, you know, if a person wants to tell a story about their father who died a week ago, you can tell that, you know, at the funeral. You can tell that in a place that isn't being marketed as entertainment. And I think we have to remember that. But you sure as hell can get back there in a few years when you're ready and tell that story. And write it down and write down everything you're feeling. And I think it's going to be even stronger. So it's not don't tell these stories. It's just wait until you are in a place where you can.
Yeah, I agreed. And one of my pet peeves, though, again, is then the opposite of when somebody's faking an emotion on stage to try to trigger something.
They're doing that in Seattle too?
Huh?
They do that in Seattle too?
Oh my God. Yeah. They're like, I saw a guy who's like, and that was the day I knew my father respected me. And I'm like, that emotion isn't real. That you didn't mean that.
No, I always thought LA was the land of the fake cry, but now I know it's gone. We've moved it around. It's spread. I think it originated here, the fake cry.
You think?
But, I mean, because it was something that I didn't really see much in New York. And then I moved here and I was like, what is going on? But now it's in Seattle too. It's taking over.
Yeah, and like I tell students, I'm like, you know, emotion's great if it's real, but don't fake it.
As well as shortcomings are great if you're not faking them. I have, you know, and just like when we are upset because we find out that some politician will like fake, you know, a struggle and really they were, you know, they weren't struggling their whole life or something like that, right? Like they fake coming from lesser means than they come from so they can be the American dream. We see that a lot in politics. We see it in storytelling too, a person talking about some struggles that they really didn't have. And that an audience can read as well.
Yeah, I think audiences pick up on artificiality that fast. And if you're not being authentic, they'll hate you. I mean, they won't hate you, they just won't like you.
Well, the storytelling audience is so smart. They're so smart. It never ceases to amaze me how highbrow they are.
Yeah, and they're like normally 5 steps ahead of where you are when you're sharing the story. They come to storytelling shows, so they kind of know where you might even be going with the story, and they want the payoff.
Yeah, they want that, but also, you know, coming from a stand-up background, for me, it was like I came from a place where I would have audience being like, I'm hating you to start, go ahead, make me laugh, and if not, I'm gonna heckle you. You know, that was a lot of shows. And then I came and did story. people that read the New Yorker that are watching me perform. And it was like a complete, that want me to do well, that want to, and it was like so refreshing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Well, thank you so much for taking time with us today. I'm going to see if anybody has any questions in the chat room. So please, if you have any questions for Margot before we sign out, just type them in. And I am stuttering like I am don't know what I'm saying because I don't know what I'm saying right now. So I'm going to check the chat room. All right. Oh, we got one. Oh, Jill just posted a link to your class. Thank you, Jill. You can sign up for Sunday's class on the 21st with Margot. And
it's also on my website, margotleitman.com. The class is up there as well.
Great. Well, Margot, great to see your face.
Thank you. Good to see yours. It's always nice to see a grown up.
And thank you for taking time with us. And thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Do I hang up?
Nope, I'm going to turn it off.
Oh.